But I was just thinking even in cinematography and the blocking, it's in a way very rigid, but also very open. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about all those people in the credits, like Sidney Powell and Bernstein's score, which is just divine, about how to balance this sense of structure that you were putting on and that it needed to be very formal and exacting, while also allowing this like emotion to come through, which I don't know how you did that, and I'm just want to pick your brain about how you did that.
It took every person involved, their respect, I think, for a very ultimately synthetic language, a love of what is artificial about cinema, but an understanding that within that artifice, there is this authenticity that the audience creates. And sometimes when you just hand them the authenticity, there's no place for them to do anything. And so when you give them these layers, this movie, it has layers to kind of travel through, I think, as a viewer, a contemporary viewer who feels sophisticated and like we're ahead of the movie. And you're supposed to be ahead of the movie. Like that's the thing about melodrama, the thing about pathos, is you see the truck coming onto the character before she does. And you're like, oh shit, and you invest in that anticipatory relationship. But the thing about Julie makes it sound so easy, and I don't know how, I think it takes really extraordinary actors to trust the surface of the language and to not fight it, you know what I mean, and not make it, tether it and mess it up and make it seem more naturalistic. But to really trust that it's sort of a poetic discourse that's not like real life. And that was just something. So you read things on the plane of Julie's face through the character, and there's sometimes a mask there. And then you see it start to shiver and break, and those are those moments that are just so, it's a series of luck and of an extraordinary fortuitousness of finding people who I could work with. And I think that was just true for all of the creative, in various parallel ways, all the creative departments who contributed to the movie.
Christine, maybe we could talk a little bit about harnessing all of those various departments. And this movie could not have, as you say, it was a little slippery production and can't have been easy to assemble. What was the guiding star, the North Star that you kept sort of thinking and be like, we're just going to make it happen, regardless?
I mean, it was a big movie for both of us. It really was, and it was very hard to get the financing together. To assemble the creative group, though, I don't think was that hard. I mean, it was your first movie with Ed.
Yep.
And with Mark Friedberg.
Yeah.
And not with Sandy, but only your second movie with Sandy. So those three, that kind of like, that trinity, just seemed so obvious and natural. And obviously, Todd's had extraordinary collaborations with all three since then. But one of the things that was sort of great about sitting in the back and watching the credits was we were all remembering like the hair and makeup people, and the grip, and like, because those people also, it was such an extraordinary task. With it was incredibly ambitious for the funds we had, and so of course we remembered every single person that put in those. Put in that work, that pushed, that made the wig, that managed to get the plant in front of Julie's pregnant stomach. Because it almost more than any movie I've ever made, it was such a sum of those parts.
Can we talk about the wig and the blonde hair? And so I know that originally we were not going to have a blonde at the center of the story.
He wrote it as a redhead, and you did, and there was actually even, didn't you draw? Yeah, You drew something. He even drew, when he sent me the script, he had drawn this redheaded woman on the front. I was like, yeah. Drew you. But I was like, God, that's not right. It's not right. I said, redheads are not the quintessential American woman. You know, we don't have a redhead at the center of our culture. You know, it's always a blonde. I said it's a beautiful blonde in a beautiful blue dress, you know, driving a blue car. Like I thought that's who Cathy Whitaker is. You know, and I was like, redheads we're aberrant. You know, we're only like a couple, 2% of the world population or something. So we're not at the center of that. We're not that thing. So yeah, so that's why, and Todd was nice enough to be like, okay, Julie, okay.
You sound really goofy.
He's just so nice. What's amazing about Todd is that he's got like this razor sharp intellect. Like, he's so smart, and then he's so nice. So it's an unusual combination. Yeah.
Say that about
How much, I do want to talk to Julianne about your performance, and I think what Todd was getting at was something that I notice every time I watch Far From Heaven, which is how much you reveal and what you withhold in those beautiful close-ups, especially in that final one where we think we know what you are feeling, but I don't think we ever get to it because there's these layers, but there's also just so much and so little that you're doing. And again, I'm just trying to ask magicians to tell me their tricks. And but how did you find your way into Cathy's voice, her posture? Because there's also an arc to that, and the physicality that we're seeing throughout the film.
Right. That's an interesting question. There was a lot that I borrowed from things that I had observed in movies, in these classic movies. I based her voice on Doris Day, actually, who I thought had the most beautiful speaking voice. And I actually even asked Todd to watch my pitch, because I get excited, my pitch goes up, and I wanted to make sure that I always stayed kind of, fluid and low and kind of velvety, because I also thought she kind of believes in all of that, right? She believes in that, in what she believes she's achieved, which is perfection, right? I'm the American blonde, I have 2 beautiful children, I have a wonderful husband, I have this life, and it's an idea of like holding on to all this structure that's given her life meaning. But then I think in a realistic sense, like I'm fascinated by what people don't reveal. And I think just in life, you look around and you watch, I look at people and I always think, what are they thinking? What are they feeling? Whatever, what are they revealing? What are they not revealing? And so I think and Todd gives you so much structure that he gives you liberty as an actor to explore that, right? It's like, it's not all on me. I'm allowed to be a human being in this story, in this environment, telling the story, but I'm not telling the entire story because I can lean into the entire world that he's created, which is how human beings exist too. We exist in context. So, because sometimes I think with performance, there's this weird burden or expectation that an actor is supposed to deliver the entire world on their face, and you simply can't because human beings don't. But the beauty of being in one of Todd's movies is that it's relaxing. He's done a lot of the work for you. You really do. He does it all the time.
So let's talk about some of that work, because I think one of the things that sets Far From Heaven apart from, say, those Cirque films is we're on location here, as opposed to on a soundstage, even though a lot of these outdoor shots look like we're in a soundstage, and they look very constricting and claustrophobic. And I think you shot in New Jersey?
We did.
Which is
It was New Jersey, except for the Yonkers train station in New York.
So Jersey has never looked this beautiful. Sorry to any Jersey. I went to school there, so I can say that. But talk to me about how choosing those locations and choosing with Ed how to shoot them and how to evoke a style without replicating it.
Right.
How did that work?
The house was a set, a gorgeous set that Mark built. And really what we felt, and the interesting thing about Russell Meny's cinematography in Cirque films, and this is really true for All That Heaven Allows in particular, is there's a palette of complementary colors almost in every frame of that film. So there might be a mostly cool evening shot, but Jane Wyman will be wearing that red dress. And so there will always be a kind of complexity and a confusion of the palette that enriches and complicates the emotional tenor of the film is trying to convey. And similarly, we were turning the nature into artifice and the artifice into nature, you know? And so all of the locations we were in, which was about half, I think, of the movie, it was about, building, painting, dressing, and lighting the exteriors, even exterior scenes. I mean, the location scenes, and including exterior scenes. And so that was, and we had really almost silly how much rigor we applied to just talking about color. And having me, Sandy, Mark, I did like a color palette for every scene of the movie that basically described the sort of emotional range of color per scene. And it was crazy when we would literally find that one location and dress it and paint it and light it. And we would hold up my original color charts and we'd go, holy shit, it really is the same spectrum of color. Like at some level, we ingested it and it was coming out in all the various ways. Because, you know, you can have decor be an element, and that's something you can't always control. The fall performed for us miraculously, but we had already designed those dresses and the colors of those dresses outside. So there was some crazy kismet, you know, luck that happened with the environment and the timing of the season. But yeah, it was an amazing process of just bringing the real and the artificial together.
See what I mean about him doing all the work?
And then the other thing I want everyone to know here is that all of that color and all of those effects that we're seeing were done on camera. Like none of it was digitally altered. I'm assuming it's not easy to guess.
It was really pre-digital, and the idea that we could alter things digitally wasn't in our vocabulary.
I mean, literally, I just was remembering while watching the closing credit sequence, a friend of Christine's partner, Marlene Bruno, had painted all of those several paintings. There was about 12 in there. And the entire closing credit sequence was done on a single piece of negative, where all the dissolves were done in camera, from one painting to the next. And we rewound and burned the white credits through it. There's no superimposition. There's not even an optical layer on top. It was all done in camera, and it was a complete, you know, single piece of film.
I want to talk a little bit about the themes of the film. I think I'm getting stuck a little bit on the visuals, but I think there's such thematic richness to it that feels as timely in 2022 as it did in 2002 and as it probably did in the 1950s. And I just wanted to ask the three of you, what do you feel this film was telling us in 2002, and what might it be telling us in 2022? Again, really simple.
You take that, Christine. Come on.
Christine. You got it. You know, look, this movie, I'm going to just answer a question I prefer to answer.
There we go.
How do I answer that? I mean, there's a reason why certain movies resonate and why they are truly evergreens. And I remember when we first started to show, when we test screened the film for the first time. And it didn't go well because people were a little like, well, is this funny? Like, is this like, what is this? And they almost needed permission to lean into the emotionality of it.
Yeah.
You know, and we knew at the time that when people started to write about it, and when there was discourse about the movie, that people would feel that permission, and it would become the extraordinary emotional experience that it is. I remember when it got onto airplanes, and it was one of my first movies that got onto an airplane, I remember that I would walk down the aisle seeing people crying and realize they were watching the movie. So that was a real, kind of understanding that kind of grip that a film can have, but also, how we need to sort of allow ourselves to have that experience with it was, that was a big deal.
I do think, as you sort of were suggesting, I think the critical, we were talking about this last night with Safe, the critical culture that surrounded film at the time
Right.
helped audiences, helped all of us contextualize films like this. And Safe was a film that people didn't know what to make of either when it first came out. But the critics went back and they kept revisiting the film even within the first year that it was released, and then definitely by the end of the 90s. And that was something that was happening with this film as well. And, I think there's a line in the movie that's sort of a MacGuffin, sort of a lie, that says it's all about what's, beneath the surface. And really, in Cirque, it's all on the surface. Everything you need to know is painfully evident. And these people's lives are being crushed, and there's something, and I do think that's unfortunately why it is sadly maybe still relevant today. That we, as we think we move forward, we are moving backwards in so many different ways. And so the issues and the dilemmas and the struggles that we think are like so resolved and we're so beyond in this movie are not. There's a really touching story of a friend, of a woman who was a film curator, and she said, this crazy thing happened where I finally got around to watching your movie, Far From Heaven, and my little 3-year-old was with me on the couch. And I thought she would fall asleep during the movie, and I would be able to just finally watch it on the video or whatever we were circulating. And at the end of the movie, she looked down, and her 3-year-old kid was crying. And she said, "Honey, what's the matter?" And the little girl said, why can't that nice lady be with that nice man? And then I was like, yeah, that's what cinema is. Great, great movies. And I aspire to the filmmakers that can do this in ways that I don't always, that it's really hard. That something that's simple and universal is communicated through images, through faces, through really universal language that we all share,
That's lovely. I want to go back to something, Christine, that you said about giving audiences sort of the opportunity or the opening up for them to feel emotions. And I think one of the things that I felt, especially with this audience tonight, was how funny some moments in the film are. And that the humor is always coming from this sense of discomfort, or that you don't know whether something is funny, but it is. You can't help it but laugh, or that it's unintentional. And it got me thinking about how, saying I'm going to do a Circean melodrama in 2001 could have sounded like camp, and could have sounded like pastiche, and could have sounded very absurd. And calibrating the moments when it could be funny, and calibrating the moments when it would just let a 3-year-old into tears. How much of that was a discussion about what's the difference between, or how do we not toe the line and go into that other part where it just becomes laughable?
I thought you were asking Christine.
Oh, no,
That's not
I was going to jump right into it.
I attribute so much of it to, we haven't talked about the music. And melodrama means music, melos is music, meets drama. And music is an emotional language that functions parallel to other kinds of discourse and other kinds of, language. And Elmer had done every kind of genre in his career, but he really hadn't done melodrama. Like, he began his career doing great jazz scores, and then he went on to do, Blackbird Jungle and many other, and then he did, To Kill a Mockingbird, one of the most beautiful, scores of his career, of his incredibly beautiful and varied career. But he just brought a layer of language and a parallel track that the movie needed to fill stuff in. And sometimes it's light and it's buoyant and it quotes other movies and it makes you feel permission to laugh and to see the connections from culture and giggle and all that. And then all of a sudden something happens musically and narratively that I think, also lets you feel it in different ways, other levels at the same time. And he was 80 years old. It was the last film that he scored. And we kind of fell in love with each other. And he traveled with me. He came to, London with the movie. He was so proud of the movie. He didn't let himself get sucked into the Oscars thing. He'd been nominated so many times, and he never won an Oscar. His only Oscar Elmer Bernstein ever won was for additional music to Thoroughly Modern Millie. Of all those extraordinary scores. And I think when he was nominated for the Oscar, people thought, oh, Elmer Bernstein, he has a whole shelf of Oscars. And he just, bit by bit, kind of let himself want it, And then it just kills me and I just saw his face sort of drop. I think the Golden Globes was the one that he lost, and we all thought he would win it, and you. Anyway, but I had the supreme privilege of working with Elmer Bernstein on his last, movie. So he's just one of the most amazing guys.
Julianne, in terms of performance, again, that calibration, did it feel like there were moments of humor, or that?
Oh, always, always. I mean, whenever you're doing something that's really silent, and also Todd laughs at everything that I do. So every time I try to be like, stop it. I'm not there, yeah, because he really thought that was funny. So, but I think that I love genre, I love style, right? There's for me, it's really exciting when I have kind of shape to something. But if you don't fill it, it's funny, right? So that's the thing. It's like you really have to. That's the challenge. How do you take that size, that sort of outsize of something, and fill it with something real? Because that's what makes a 3-year-old cry. Because it's big. It's a big feeling in a kind of a shell. And it's exciting to do as a performer because you really feel like you're kind of going out there on a limb, because it can be comical. If it's not filled properly, it is comical, and there are moments when obviously yes, it is funny and you can laugh and that's great, but there are moments when you don't want them to. So how do you ground it with that sincerity? And going back to what Todd was saying about Elmer Bernstein's score, it's very sincere. It's very deeply felt. It connects to you kind of like this, and so that's sort of what you're trying to do with this. That's the challenge and the beauty of this kind of a piece, is that you have to reach really far to make those things meet.
And then maybe this is a good opportunity to talk about this amazing ensemble of actors who are not here, but Dennis Quaid, Dennis Haysbert, Patricia Clarkson, Viola Davis. I'd forgotten, and I don't know how I could have forgotten. And that they really do fill this universe, and so maybe go and talk a little bit about working with them and what that kind of chemistry in the room and on set felt like, because it does feel like you're all sort of operating on this same wavelength.
We were so lucky. I think Dennis Quaid did something he'd never done before in his career, and he was ready to go to this place. There's something, bristling beneath the surface that's so painful and so evident from the beginning. And Dennis Haysbert, there were other actors who I had read for that part who could bring, who tried to give it a little more natural authenticity in the way that those scenes would be read. And Dennis had this sort of sonorous, kind of opera-like presence in the way that he spoke, and his physical being and his beauty, you know, a kind of grace and a kind of, so it just immediately felt melodious and in the language of this time. And that was what, you know, and Patty as well, and Viola.
Yeah.
My God, we were so, you know, blessed to have Viola Davis in this movie. It's crazy to watch those scenes today, you know? You feel almost more appalled by the culture watching her in that role. And Cathy's contradictory, at times really disturbing treatment of her, frustration with her. You know, that's the thing about these characters too, is they're complicated, contradictory, they're not just likable at all, even though Cathy is someone you feel for intensely. But they're all struggling and they lash out on each other. And that's what people do. And they don't have a lot of good choices.
I do have to talk about that final moment, not to explain it, not to sort of talk about what it means, but about the impact that you wanted that moment to have, because it all builds to that. And I think if that moment didn't work, if that moment didn't land, we maybe would not be here. But Julianne, what did it take to get there?
Well, it's so hard to shoot the end of the movie when you're not actually at the end of the movie. That's the thing. So, you know, realize that when we shot that train station, we were halfway through the film.
I think that's right.
Yeah, right? So it was like maybe the last few days of our exteriors before we went inside, did all the huge scenes inside. So you're like, I don't even know how to do this. It's always horrifying because you know, and on a day like that too, you're like, we're losing the light, it's 4:30. It's October 19th, it's 4:30 and we gotta wrap up. You know, so it's like all of that kind of stuff is happening. And it's also, you know, you're leaning into all those scenes that you've seen at a train station with somebody saying goodbye and knowing that you need to kind of hit that stuff. We just saw the end of it and I was like, oh my God, this looks so beautiful. The lighting is so insane. That the shots are gorgeous. But I don't remember, I really remember feeling like, oof, I gotta get this right. You know, I was scared because I didn't know the end of Cathy Whitaker's story at that point as an actor, right? And then, you know when the train is pulling away, the train's not really pulling away, I'm just looking at the camera pulling away. And, you know, so all of that stuff is happening. So if it worked, thank God. But yeah, that's the challenge of this stuff. Yeah.
Maybe we can talk a little bit about the place that this film now occupies in our sort of canon of queer films. And so, Christine, I'd be remiss not to talk about this with you. You know, we're celebrating 40 years of Outfest, and I think, you know, American independent queer cinema would not be what it is today were it not for you. For those of you who don't have IMDb handy, Always Don't Cry, we have Fox Films, we have How to Begin the Angry Inch, Zola, most recently, which I also... I am just curious how you see Far From Heaven in your own canon of...
How... I don't know how to answer
The
that.
baby that you love the most.
It's just, look, you don't really know. You know, having the luxury of being here now, you know, 20 years later, and being able to look back and think about, as, you know, we've spent, you know, last night and tonight doing, just amongst the three of us, talking about what it was like to make it and what it felt to us at the time. And then having that extraordinary, you know, pleasure of seeing it 20 years later and thinking and being able to look at its resonance and find new ways that it's resonant now. You know, no one ever sets out to make a terrible movie, of course. And we all set out to make movies that will stand the test of time, but you don't always get to. So that's really all I can say about that. It's like, we got to.
I think that's a perfect sentiment to end on. I want to once again, let's give our three esteemed guests.